Hi everyone, today I'll show you how to create ultra-realistic Microsoft Flight Simulator videos. First, you will obviously need Microsoft Flight Simulator. It doesn't matter which version you have purchased, Standard, Deluxe, Premium Deluxe. You will be aware that certain aircraft and modeled airports are not available in the Standard or Deluxe version. For example, if you want to fly the Boeing 787, it is only available in the Premium Deluxe version. Next, you obviously need a PC that can handle the system requirements of Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's obvious that if you have the budget, bigger is always better. In technical terms, you will need a strong CPU, graphics card, and a good amount of internal memory. This should be combined with an SSD hard drive. Flight Simulator 2020 has always been CPU bottlenecked, which means that your performance is limited by the CPU, not the GPU. But with the new frame generation technology in NVIDIA RTX 4000 video cards, performance has gotten much better. You will still experience CPU bottlenecks, especially when AI traffic is turned on. AI traffic means that your CPU needs to process a large amount of moving objects, which takes a serious toll on FPS. But otherwise, frame generation has opened up a whole new chapter for me. If you have the budget, I recommend you get an RTX 4000 series, which will also cover you for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Having said that, there are reports of tools that allow you to bring frame generation to RTX 3000 and even RTX 2000 series video cards. I have not tested this, but if you don't want to upgrade your system, this may be an option for you to boost your FPS. Just so you have some data to compare, I have an i7-12700 and an RTX 4090 with 32 GB internal memory. In dense scenery areas such as New York, I get 40 to 50 FPS at 4K and terrain level of detail at 200. When I turn AI traffic on through FSLTL with stationary aircraft on the ground and no moving aircraft, it remains at about the same. When I turn AI traffic on with, for example, 50 moving aircraft, it goes down to just over 30 frames per second, which is actually too low to look good in a frame generation environment, as you start seeing the effects of frame generation on fine lines and shapes, such as cockpit displays. For me, it means that even with my system, I can't play with AI traffic fully active on busy airports. All this is caused by the CPU bottleneck. In Flight Simulator 2024, we will hopefully no longer have the CPU bottleneck issue, as Flight Simulator 2024 will use multi-threading. Next, in addition to the PC, you need additional hardware for quality recording. You would want to use at least a 2K monitor, as 1080 pixel resolutions tend to look blurred. I have a monitor with a resolution of 5120x1440. However, I don't record in that resolution, as it is too wide to look good on replay on standard monitors. For recording, I set my monitor resolution to 3840x1440, which is essentially 4K resolution horizontally and 2K resolution vertically. It's a widescreen format, which looks nice for cinematic views, and it works well for my purposes. The total number of pixels is less than 4K, which also frees up system resources. You would also want to invest at least in a good joystick or yoke, as this allows you to realistically and precisely maneuver your aircraft, which is essential for a realistic recording of takeoffs and landings. One significant factor to improve realism is using a head tracker. Head trackers allow you to move your viewing angle in the aircraft by moving your head. A head tracker is a piece of hardware that detects how you move your head. I use a head tracker called Toby 5, but other head trackers are less expensive and provide similar functionality. You can even use your own webcam as a head tracker, which won't cost you anything if you already have a webcam. For this to work, you will need to download and configure two types of software called OpenTrack and AI Track. There are tutorials out there that explain how to do this. Head tracking has been a game changer for me, and I'll never go back. For both flying and recording, it adds a lot of immersion and realism. Next, you need to customize your graphics settings. A lot has been said and written about optimal graphics settings, so I'm not going to repeat that here in detail. You will find numerous guides and tutorials on that here on YouTube. However, I'll show you what settings work for me and highlight a few key settings you will need to be aware of. So here we are in the graphics settings of Microsoft Flight Simulator. This is the resolution I've picked for my flights, and one very important thing here is the render scaling settings. So usually you would set that to the native resolution of your monitor. So in this case, I would have it set to the native resolution here. However, I've set it to 150, which provides me with a rendering resolution of 5760 times 2160. So what's the reason for this? The reason is that if you do this, if you turn it further up towards maximum, the image becomes crisper and clearer. So for example, if you look at lines in the distance, say for example poles or building textures, it becomes much crisper and clearer, although the rendering resolution is above your native resolution. Setting this to a higher level is very GPU intensive, so you can only do this if you have a strong GPU. But I think it's definitely worth it, and it does improve the quality of your recordings. Next, of course, if you have an RTX 4000 series, you would have NVIDIA frame generation set to on, combined with DX12, which is required for frame generation. Now, one of the most important settings, obviously, as you know, in Flight Simulator is the terrain level of detail. This is one of the most CPU intensive settings that you can use. If you set this to a high value, it will stretch your CPU capacity. So what I do with my system is I usually set it to 200 maximum, because everything beyond 200 doesn't really look a lot better. And setting it to 400 really takes a lot of system resources, and there will be a lot of lagging and stuttering, which you don't want. So 200 is usually the setting that is good enough, and that's also the default setting for when you pick Ultra settings as a global setting. Now further down here, I would usually say you can set everything to Ultra. It won't impact too much on your system. There are a few things where I am deviating from the Ultra settings. For example, I've turned this off. This is because in my NVIDIA settings, I have set anisotropic filtering to 16 times, which I don't need to double up in the simulator. And one very important thing that I recommend that you do is setting this value to 8192. This is shadow maps, and this defines the clarity of the shadows in your cockpit. As you've maybe seen in your cockpit, when the sun shines into the cockpit, there are a lot of shadow lines that often look blurred and don't look good in the sim. There's a trick to set this to 8192. Naturally, you can't pick this setting here in the simulator. It won't let you do it. But if you open up your user cfg.opt file, you can set it to 8192 here, and the shadow lines in the cockpit become much clearer. In addition to the in-sim graphics settings, you should also play around with your Nvidia Control Panel settings to optimize your performance. One important thing that I recommend doing is setting yourself a maximum frame rate. I've set myself a maximum frame rate of 60 frames per second. That helps free up important system resources and helps prevent micro stutters. Another setting that I recommend looking at is the power management mode. Here I suggest that you set prefer maximum performance. This helps release your graphic card's maximum performance by supplying your graphics card with all the power it needs. Many tutorials have been made around the ideal NVIDIA control panel settings, and if you wish to look into this in more detail, you will certainly find information on YouTube. Next, realistic flight simulator videography obviously requires realistic looking and functioning aircraft. Microsoft Flight Simulator has a lot of aircraft in it, but not all are of the same quality. Default aircraft tend to be of limited quality. So far I've made videos using the default Boeing 747-8, the Latin VFR A340, the Phoenix A320, the PMDG Boeing 777, and the Horizon Simulations Boeing 787, which requires the default Boeing 787 as a base. All of these aircraft have their pros and cons, but for me it's clear, and I believe you will agree, that premium aircraft such as the Phoenix A320 and the PMDG 777 are by far the best aircraft for realistic videos for a bunch of reasons. First, they have extremely detailed exterior and interior modeling. Second, the aircraft systems are detailed and functional. Third, the flight model, that is the behavior of the plane on the ground and in the air, is realistic and accurate. And fourth, the sound packs are true reality, excepting the PMDG 777, which initially needed a fair bit of work on its sound pack post-release. Setting flex. It is possible to create great videos using cheaper payware or even freeware aircraft. Fly-by-wire is a great freeware example, but even the default Boeing 747-8 has in my view advanced to be a great and flyable aircraft with an acceptable depth of cockpit systems, though there is certainly room for more system depth. The Latin VFI 340 has a nice exterior and interior model and a great sound pack. But the cockpit systems and flight model aren't great. The elevator is way too sensitive, and I've had a hard time trying to mitigate this issue in the flight simulator control settings. The Horizon Simulations Boeing 787 also has a nice exterior model and nicely modeled cockpit, but again, the flight model has the same issue with the elevator being way too responsive, which makes takeoffs and landings very hard to manage and takes away a lot of the fun. Next, to produce realistic videos, you obviously want to understand how to fly your airplane. I'm not a pilot, and you don't need to be a pilot to teach yourself the basics of flying an airplane. There are lots of tutorials about it, even paid courses that teach you how to fly an Airbus or Boeing aircraft. I found that once you have understood the basics, Airbus and Boeing aircraft function quite similar, though there are some material differences regarding the functionality of the flight management system, the autopilot, or the structure of the overhead panel. If you're a bit nerdy, I recommend that you download the operations manual of the aircraft that you want to learn to fly. The operations manual should have a section with normal procedures, which is essentially a detailed list of actions you need to take in each phase of a flight. Studying this will give you the background you need. Flying airliners, realistically, will also require you to become familiar with flight planning tools, such as SimBrief. SimBrief allows you to realistically plan your route based on current navigation data, just as real-world pilots do it. Using Navigraph is another nice way of making your flights more realistic, especially as it allows you better flight planning with current standard instrument departure and standard terminal arrival route data. The sim often doesn't have current SID or star data, which means that SIDs and stars recommended by SimBrief are often not found in your aircraft's database. Navigraph solves that issue, and it provides you with a wealth of SID and star charts to properly plan your flights. Next, you will want to upgrade your simulator. By that, I don't just mean purchasing better aircraft, which you should definitely do if you have the budget. It's also about scenery upgrades. For all my videos, I use payware airports whenever available. This is obviously a budget question for some, as payware airports can easily cost $20 and more, but when I purchased my first high-quality payware airport, it convinced me to never go back to default airports. I think the first one I bought was New York John F. Kennedy from iNeBuilds. Payware airports add a wealth of realistic detail and textures to the airport you're flying at. It's so much more real that it's definitely worth it. It should be noted that payware scenery usually comes with an FPS hit. More generally, on flightsim.io, there are thousands of useful and beautiful flight simulator updates that enhance your experience. If you want to make a realistic flight simulator video, check out what's available there. Two noteworthy upgrades are the We Love VFR packs, which add significant VFR scenery, such as power plants, towers, and power lines to the sim, and Global AI Ship Traffic, which adds ship traffic across the world. Further, realistic videography requires that you change the colors of your sim. The default colors of Flight Simulator 2020 are quite pale and too yellow. If you have an Nvidia graphics card, I recommend using Nvidia filters to improve the default colors. Using Nvidia filters has been a massive improvement for me, and again, something from which I'll never go back. Look at this difference. I use the following three settings: sharpen, and color and details. But the exact right settings will depend on your system, your monitor, and other factors, so you will need to play around a little bit to find the right color mix for your monitor. If you don't have an NVIDIA graphics card, there are also other tools, such as Reshade, that can do the same. Next, one thing that is often underestimated but plays a significant role in creating a realistic experience is aircraft sound packs. For a default aircraft, and even for payware aircraft, I often find the sound packs rather disappointing and nowhere near what aircraft actually sound like externally and internally. Isn't hearing the sound of your engines an important part of your experience? The mighty roar of a General Electric GE90 or the spool-up whine of a GE Next Generation engine or an IAE V2500. Many default sound packs rather sound like a washing machine or a hairdryer, and nothing like their real counterparts. Real sound is almost as important to me as realistic visuals. It adds a realistic ambience to your flight videos which you wouldn't want to miss. Thankfully, someone has seen this issue and become an expert in developing flight simulator sound packs. If you're not familiar with the software studio FT-Sim Plus, I definitely recommend that you check them out. I am using their sound packs for all my Boeing aircraft, and again, I'll never go back to default. Now let's get into video recording, which may be the actual reason why you clicked on this video. So, how do you actually record what you see in your simulator? First, you must know that there is no inbuilt function in the current simulator to record anything. You need external software to do this, which is called screen recording software. Luckily, there is an advanced and easy to use, totally free screen recorder available called OBS. OBS allows you to record what you see on your monitor. OBS then creates video files in common video formats that you can further use in creating your video. For those of you who are not familiar with OBS, here's a quick rundown of how I use it. Alright, so this is the main screen. This is the start-stop recording button, and here you'll see what you're recording. I'm obviously recording the OBS window at the moment, so it's basically recording itself. Now, the important things here is the settings. So here's a lot of settings that you need to adjust to your own requirements. What's important are the output settings, and we're talking about recording only, not about streaming, so you don't need to do anything here. But here in the recording tab you need to make quite a few adjustments. I can't change anything here right now because I'm recording, but essentially what you need to do is you need to pick your recording path here. You need to pick a recording format. This one's working well for me. And then you need to pick an encoder, for which I've picked this one. It's taken me a bit of time to figure out which encoder I should be using, but this has proven to be working well for me with the requirements that I have, for example, regarding 10-bit recording. When we scroll down here, there are a few settings that you also need to be aware of. One very important thing is the bitrate, which should be set to a high value, for example 80,000 kilobits per second, which warrants good video quality. If this is set to a low value, for example 10,000 or 20,000, then there will be noticeable downgrades of your video quality. There are further adjustments and settings here that you should look at. I'm not going to give you an in-depth run through here now, but you should Google and pick the right settings for you here. There's not much to say around audio, but when it comes to video, obviously you would want to choose the right resolution for you here and the frames per second value. And another important tab is the advanced tab, where you decide the color format, color space, and other settings. So this is the setting that's very important for me. Color format set to 10-bit. I think there's a clearly noticeable difference between 8-bit and 10-bit recordings with regards to color depth and simply the liveliness of the colors. So it's definitely worth playing around with this and picking 10-bit if you can. Having said that, you need a video editing software that can handle 10-bit, and not all freeware software can do that. So when I want to create a recording, let's say I want to record this takeoff. All I need to do is run OBS and then press the recording hotkey, which for me is F9. It then records until I press F9 again, and saves it all in a video file. In summary, OBS allows you to record whatever you see on your screen in Microsoft Flight Simulator. That's easy when you're sitting in the cockpit while flying, but how do you create recordings of passenger views or external views of your aircraft during critical flight maneuvers such as takeoff and landing? You need to sit in the cockpit for this to control your airplane, but how do you record these perspectives? For this, you need another third-party software, which is called a replay tool. A replay tool allows you to record the flight movements and flight path of your aircraft and then replay the flight from any camera perspective. It does not record a video file, it only records the flight path within Microsoft Flight Simulator and the settings of your aircraft during different stages of flight, such as the position of the gear lever and the flaps. This way, you can basically become a guest on your own flight and record the entire flight with OBS from the passenger window or from the external perspective. All you need to do is do your flight once from the cockpit while recording your flight with the replay tool, and then replay your flight from the replay tool to create actual video recordings. The tool makes your aircraft move along the recorded flight path in the simulator. You can even change the time of day or weather during replay. There are several different replay tools, some are free, some payware. I use a free tool called SkyDolly. So when it comes to recording and maintaining as high as possible frames per second, there is one thing that's clear. Even the most powerful systems on the market currently can't play Flight Simulator at ultra settings and 60 FPS in dense areas with lots of add-ons and AI traffic activated. That's simply not possible in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. However, there is an easy trick to double or quadruple your FPS for any video recording. You simply need to record your footage at half speed or quarter speed. Replay tools like SkyDolly allow you to replay your flight at 50% speed, 25% speed, and even 10% speed. If you're flying in a high-density area with ultra settings, you can simply reduce the replay rate to 50%, which makes your aircraft move at 50% speed. Once you have recorded your footage, you can then speed up the footage to 100% in your video editing software, more on that below, and that will double your FPS. If you record while replaying at 25%, it will quadruple your FPS. I record at 50% or 25% speed in all my videos for takeoffs and landings, as I rarely get the FPS that I want out of my system. In short, creating high-quality recordings at ultra settings with 60 FPS or above is definitely possible using this trick. You can even achieve this with old graphics cards or old CPUs. Just have your video replay slowly and then speed it up in the video editing software. This trick, of course, only works when you record while replaying a flight. What about recording while actually sitting in the cockpit during takeoff and no replay tool in use? Here you can help yourself by reducing the sim rate and recording while the sim rate is at 50% or 25%, etc. The only disadvantage here is that in that case, you would need to maneuver your aircraft at 50% or 25% speed, which can be hard to manage as all your inputs, for example rudder inputs, come with a delay at lower speeds. When speeding up footage recorded at slow speeds in the video editing software, there are trade-offs that you need to work around. For example, speeding up video footage also speeds up the sound data recorded with the video. When you speed up the video, the sound won't be great anymore. You will need to work around that. Sound files should always be played and used at their original 100% speed. In summary, you can record high-quality Microsoft Flight Simulator videos with old hardware. Even with an RTX 2000 series, you should be able to record at 60 FPS at New York, if you only record at 25% or even 10% speed. Next, realistic footage requires you to become familiar with the drone camera. A frequent question was how you do the walkarounds around the aircraft. This is all done by the drone camera. I'll not go into detail here on how to use the drone camera, There are tutorials out there that explain that in detail. But in short, there are a few functions that you should know. First, the drone follow function. This function simply makes your camera attached to your aircraft or stop following the aircraft. With follow mode off, it looks like this. With follow mode on, it looks like this. Second, the drone lock function. This function makes your camera always focus on the aircraft, which is great for takeoffs and landings. With lock mode on, it looks like this. With lock mode off, it looks like this. During this takeoff, I have turned the follow function off, so my camera remains stationary at the airport, regardless of the movements of my plane. But I have turned the lock function on, so the camera angle follows the movement of the aircraft. To turn on the lock function, you will need to first reset your view, then tilt the camera to exactly focus on the aircraft, then press lock. You can then readjust the lock position slightly if you wish. One other very important feature of the drone camera that I want to mention here is the depth of field function. This function enables you to take beautiful cinematic shots with blurred backgrounds, which really makes your sim look a lot more realistic. So, let's assume you've recorded all your footage. You now want to cut the video files into one. For this, you will need some capable video editing software, which in addition to your screen capturing software and the replay tool, is the third essential piece of software that you need. There are lots of video editing programs out there, but I have settled with DaVinci Resolve. I purchased the full version, as I need many of the functions that aren't included in the free version, for example 10-bit video editing. If you want to use DaVinci Resolve, you will find tutorials that help you learn it. I find it easy and intuitive. It also lets you add multiple audio tracks, which is important. Finally, for high-quality video editing, you will need another piece of software that lets you edit sound files. As you can tell, I add multiple external sound files into the simulator, and these need editing before they are ready. You need a sound editor for this, and I use NCH WavePad, which has lots of good functions and is very easy to use. By the way, pixabay.com is a great website where I get all my music and sound files from. Much of its content is free to use, even for commercial purposes, including monetizing on YouTube. You may have noticed that in most of my videos I use additional sound effects such as spoken ATC communications and airport terminal announcements. I have exclusively used and recorded my own voice for all of these spoken sound effects and then modified the recordings. For example, this terminal voice is actually my own voice.
All departures from Heathrow Airport are currently suspended. We are working closely with authorities to resolve the situation as quickly and safely as possible.
But I have used 11labs.io to modify it into a female voice. I upload my own voice recordings here and then let 11labs turn it into a female voice. Once recorded, I open WavePad and add some reverb, and there we go. That's the terminal announcement sound effect.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Munich Airport. The current time is 7:15 a.m.
11labs even allows you to pick accents. This is also my own voice.
British Airways 005 to Tokyo.
But I've picked a male English accent for it. With ATC it's the same. All ATC recordings in my videos are my own voice, uploaded to 11labs, then turned into a different male or female voice, then edited through WavePad to give it the sound of a radio voice. For recording videos, I do not use tools such as Beyond ATC, because ATC in your simulator may call you at any point in time, which means I would have to keep running my video recording software or at least an audio recording software throughout the entire flight, which I found difficult to manage. For example, when taking a 10-hour long-haul flight, you would not want to record throughout those 10 hours. I found it easier to have a separate set of ATC communications, which I simply need to add in during the video editing process. Maybe another note on how much time it takes to create a 1-hour recording the way I do it. Creating a 1-hour high realistic flight simulator video may well take an entire week of work or even 2 weeks of work. It depends on the level of detail that you want to apply. For me, when doing a long-haul flight, such as a 6-hour, 8-hour, 10-hour flight, I never do these flights in one recording session. With my personal schedule, it's not possible to record these flights in one session. I have to break it up into several recording sessions, for example, recording the intro around the airport that I depart from, then recording the departure, then recording the cruise, and then recording the approach and landing. The difficulty with this approach is to place your aircraft back into the flight situation where you left. For example, if you stopped recording after reaching your cruise altitude and want to continue your flight the next day, you would have to place your aircraft back into the same position with the same system functionalities where you left off. This is tedious and takes a lot of time. However, thankfully, with certain aircraft, there is a so-called save panel state function, which allows you to save the state of your panel and essentially all your aircraft systems of where you left off. PMDG offers this function, so for example, if you were to stop your flight mid-flight, you could just save your mid-flight panel state, and when you come back, just place your aircraft into that position and load your panel state. Sadly, to my knowledge, only PMDG at the moment offers this function, and as many of you know, Microsoft Flight Simulator has no properly functioning save flight function, which would save me a lot of this work. Hopefully, Flight Simulator 2024 comes with a proper save flight function, which would make it much easier to record long-haul flights in separate sessions. In summary, editing complex videos takes a lot of time and perseverance. It's a lot of trial and error, it requires a lot of learning, and you also need to wrestle software stability issues, of which Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 has quite a few. However, I think the results are worth it. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Flight simulation is a great hobby, and I hope you will achieve your dream recordings with Flight Simulator.